Port Harcourt received Tare the way it receives all village boys, with absolute indifference. He had no connections here beyond one uncle and a travel bag, no name that opened doors, no history that preceded him. Just a young man from a village most people in this city had never heard of, arriving in a place that did not know he existed and did not particularly need to. He was not going to waste that. He moved into Boma's flat and made himself useful before anyone asked him to. He learned the operation the way you learn something when knowledge is the only currency you have. He watched how the city worked, not the surface of it, but the architecture underneath. Who trusted whom? Where decisions were actually made? What reliability looked like to a man who had spent decades building something real. He did the unglamorous work without being asked twice. He arrived first, he left last. And slowly, without announcement, he became the kind of person Boma's operation could not easily function without. Over a year passed this way. It was through Boma's operation that Tare first encountered Chief Okafor, a self-made man from Owerri, mid-60s, the kind of wealth built across 4 decades that had survived military governments, currency collapses, and the specific brutality of doing business in Nigeria without compromising the things that mattered, which meant it was the real kind. Chief Okafor was Boma's biggest customer, had been for 11 years. The contract between them was the kind of relationship that held an entire operation together, the kind you do not put at risk for anything. Tare understood this. He had seen how Boma's face changed when Chief Okafor's name came up. The careful respect of a man who knows exactly which relationships are load-bearing. And then he saw Adaize. She came with her father to the warehouse one Tuesday afternoon, not performing wealth, not performing anything, just present. Warm in a way that had nothing to do with effort. She spoke to the workers by name. She listened when people talked to her. And when she looked at Tare across the loading dock, just a look, nothing more, he understood that he was in a problem he had not anticipated. He said nothing for weeks. He watched instead. The way she carried herself, the specific quality of her attention when someone spoke, the way she treated people who had nothing to offer her, which is always the real measure. She was the kind of woman you do not approach casually, so he didn't. But she had noticed him noticing, and one afternoon, when her father had stepped inside and they were briefly alone, she looked at him directly and said, "You have something you want to say." He considered it honestly. Then he said, "Not yet." The corner of her mouth moved, and something began. They were careful, meeting briefly at the edges of business visits, talking in the way 2 people talk when they are learning each other slowly, and finding that what they are learning is worth the pace. She was the daughter of a man who could buy and sell most of Port Harcourt twice over. He was a village boy from Amagbeke who had arrived with nothing and was still working his way towards something. The mathematics were against them from the start. Neither of them was looking at the mathematics. Boma noticed before either of them said anything. He had built his business on reading people and reading situations. It was the same skill. And what he read in the way Tare watched the door when Chief Okafor's convoy arrived was enough. He pulled Tare aside one evening after the warehouse closed. His voice was careful, not unkind. The voice of a man who likes someone and is about to tell them something they will not want to hear. That man is my biggest customer. 11 years. I cannot afford to lose that contract. Not for anything. If he finds out his daughter is involved with one of my workers, a village boy with nothing, he will pull everything. You understand what that means for me. Tare listened without interrupting. Then he said, "I understand." Boma looked at him for a long moment. He had known this boy since he was small enough to carry. He had seen what Amagbeke had done to his brother. He had brought Tare here specifically because he believed the boy deserved better than the village's arithmetic. But there are limits to what belief can absorb. I need you to end it, Boma said, before it becomes something it cannot be undone from. Tare said nothing else that evening, but he did not end it. A man who has grown up watching his father absorb consequences quietly for 25 years learns something about what it means to choose. He learns that choosing always costs something. He learns that the cost does not make the choice wrong. Tare went to Adeze and told her everything. Not a summary, the full shape of it. Boma's warning, the contract, what it meant, what he was being asked to do. She listened without moving. Then she said, "And what do you want?" He met her eyes. "You," he said, "if that's possible." She was quiet for a long moment. Not deciding, she had already decided. Processing what the decision was going to require. Then she said, "Let me talk to my father." Tare had not expected that. He had expected her to say they should wait, or that she needed time, or that the situation was complicated. He had prepared himself for the slow withdrawal of someone who, when it came to it, chose the easier life. But this was not that woman. She arranged a meeting, sat her father down, and told him, not asked him, told him, that there was a young man she wanted him to meet, that this young man had come from nothing, had worked harder than anyone she had seen, and that she believed in him, that she wanted her father to see what she saw. Chief Okafor had not built 4 decades of wealth by ignoring the judgment of people whose judgment had proven sound, and his daughter's judgment had never once proven unsound. He agreed to meet him. They met on a Saturday morning at Chief Okafor's Port Harcourt residence. Tare arrived on time, dressed carefully, not performing wealth he didn't have, just clean, considered, present. He shook the old man's hand and met his eyes and answered his questions directly, without elaboration or performance. Chief Okafor asked him where he was from. Amagbeke, in the Niger Delta. The old man nodded slowly. He knew what that meant. He had seen enough of Nigeria to know what it took to get from a village in the Delta Creeks to a warehouse in Port Harcourt with your dignity intact. He asked Tare what he wanted. Tare said, "To build something real, something that lasts, with your daughter, if you'll allow it, on my own terms, with everything I have." Chief Okafor was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I have an all-services branch that has been underperforming for 3 years. Good operation, wrong leadership. I've been looking for someone who is hungry enough to fix it and honest enough not to steal from me while doing so." He looked at Tare. "Come and work for me. Show me what you are. The rest we will discuss when I have seen it." Tare said, "Yes, sir." He started the following Monday. What Tare did with that branch in the first year is the kind of thing that becomes a story people tell in boardrooms for decades after. He went in and learned everything. Not just the numbers, the people, the relationships, the suppliers, the clients, the specific places where the operation leaked value. He worked the hours of a man who has decided that sleep is a negotiation, and right now, he's not negotiating. He made decisions with the clarity of someone who had grown up watching what happened when you try to survive without a foundation. He built client relationships with the sincerity of someone whose only currency was reliability, because that was all he had. He delivered what he said he would, when he said he would, every single time. By the end of the first year, that branch had recorded the combined profit of its previous 4 years. Chief Okafor read the numbers twice. Then he called Tare into his office and sat across from him for a long moment without speaking. The old man's face held the expression of someone who had expected to be impressed and had been surprised by how much. "You have done well," he said. Tare said, "Thank you, sir. I am just getting started." The following year, Adeze sat down with her father. She told him about her relationship with Tare, about how it had begun, about where it had gone, about what she wanted. Chief Okafor listened to everything. He was not a man who showed surprise easily. He had spent too many decades in rooms where showing surprise cost you something. But something moved in his face as she spoke. The specific recalibration of a man who had formed a judgment and is now receiving the information that revises it. He thought about the boy from Amagbeke who had walked into his house with nothing and turned a failing operation into the best performing branch in his portfolio in 12 months. He thought about his daughter's face as she spoke. He said, "You are certain?" She said, "Completely." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "All right." One word. Carrying everything a father can say when he has looked at a situation from every angle and decided that the person his child has chosen is worthy of them. They did not make it large. Adeze had never wanted that. Despite everything her father could provide, the ballrooms, the convoys, the kind of wedding that gets photographed for magazines, she had always known that what mattered happened in the small spaces, in the quiet ones. They married 7 months later in a ceremony that was intimate and deliberate. Family, people who mattered, nothing performed. Chief Okafor gave a speech that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He said he had looked at where Tare came from and made a judgment. That the judgment had been wrong, specifically and completely wrong. He called Tare a good man and said he was proud to welcome him. For a man of his generation and his position, those words cost something real. Ebi and Preye sat in that room and watched their last-born receive what they had spent 25 years in the dark trying to make possible. Neither of them cried during the ceremony. They waited until they were alone. As a gift to their union, Chief Okafor gave them the branch Tare had built, not as charity, as the natural conclusion of what had already been proven. This was Tare's operation. It always had been. They went home that night as husband and wife, and the owners of something real. For 6 months, everything moved. Then it stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. The way a door closes, one moment open, the next shut. Contracts that had been running smoothly developed complications that made no sense. Suppliers who had been reliable for years began delivering late, then not at all. Clients who had renewed without question suddenly had concerns. Staff who had been loyal became restless without explanation. Tare went through everything, checked every decision, found his errors and corrected them. Things improved briefly, then collapsed again. He worked harder, slept less, checked more carefully. The results did not change. Adeze watched her husband in those months with the attention of a woman who knew the difference between a man who was failing and a man who was being blocked. She had grown up around enough business to know what failure looked like from the inside. She had watched her father navigate 40 years of it. She knew its texture, its logic, the specific way it responded to effort and correction. This was not that. 3 months in, she sat across from Tare at the kitchen table after another supplier had gone silent and said, "This is not the market. This is not your decisions. Something is working against you from a place your decisions cannot reach." Tare looked at her. She held his gaze. "You need to go home," she said. "Not to rest, to understand what this actually is." He was quiet for a long time. He had been carrying the same thought for weeks and had not allowed himself to say it. Hearing it from her, said plainly, without fear, was the thing that made it real enough to act on. 8 months in, the company was on the edge of folding. Tare sat in the empty office on a Friday evening and looked at the numbers one final time. He called Adeze in. He said, "You are right. I need to go home." She was already standing, already ready. "I'm coming with you," she said. They arrived in Amagbeke on a Thursday. Preye came out before they reached the gate. She always did. Something in her body still responded to her children's arrival before her mind caught up. She held Tare for a long time. Then she held Adeze, properly, both hands, the embrace of a woman who had already decided that this girl was her daughter. Ebi stood in the doorway watching. He saw his son's face and read everything in it, not the words, the weight behind the words, the specific exhaustion of a man who has been doing everything right and watching it fail anyway. He said nothing that evening. They ate. They sat together. The compound was quiet around them the way it had always been quiet. That specific Amagbeke quiet that was never quite peaceful. After midnight, when Adeze was sleeping, Tare sat with his father in the compound, and he told him everything. Every contract that had fallen apart, every supplier who had gone silent, every decision he had made correctly and watched fail anyway. 8 months of it. The full shape of it, laid out in the dark between a son and his father. Ebi listened without moving. Then he asked, "Are you working hard?" "Yes." "Making good decisions?" "The best I can." The silence that followed was not the silence of a man thinking. It was the silence of a man who already knew the answer and was deciding what to do with it. Something happened to Ebi's face in the dark that Tare had seen once before. Not the patient face, not the tired one. Something older and deeper than both. The face of a man whose compression had found the one thing it would not fold itself around. He stood up, walked to the edge of the compound, stood with his back to his son, looking out at the dark village for a long time. Then he turned around. "This is not your failure. You have done nothing wrong." "Then what is it?" Ebi looked at his son for a long moment. And in that moment, 25 years moved across his face. Every meeting attended in the dark, every refusal, every threat absorbed and survived, every year of poverty accepted as the cost of keeping his children safe. "They are reaching for you," he said. "After everything, after 25 years, they are reaching for my son's future." He said it quietly, the way a man says something when he has passed through anger and arrived somewhere colder and more permanent. "Sleep," he told Tare. "Eat. You look like you haven't been eating." Something in his voice ended the conversation. Tare slept. Ebi did not. He sat alone in the compound all night, thinking through 25 years. Every name he had refused to give, every threat he had absorbed, every year of watching his children grow up in worn uniforms while Coven families lived better, and accepting it because the alternative was unacceptable. He had paid and paid, and now they were reaching for his son's future after everything. When Preye came out at 3 in the morning and found him still sitting there, she read his face without asking. She sat beside him. "What are you going to do?" she said. "What I should have done years ago." She was quiet. Then, "I'm going with you." "You don't have to." "I know." Her eyes met his. "I'm going with you." He did not wait for a meeting. He went directly to the people he knew, the senior ones, the ones who had looked at him across that circle for 25 years and asked when he intended to give, and received the same answer every time. He found them, one by one, and he said what he had come to say. He told them he knew everything. 25 years of everything. Every name given, every family targeted, every business destroyed, every life quietly redirected into ruin. He had witnessed it all and kept silent because silence was the arrangement. The arrangement was over. "Open the way for my son," he said. "Remove whatever you have placed against him. Do it now. Do it completely." They did not fold, not immediately, not the way he had hoped. The first response came through a third party, a man Ebi had known since childhood, someone he had once trusted, who appeared at his compound 2 evenings later with a message that was not quite a threat and not quite a warning. He said the elders had considered Ebi's position. He said they understood his frustration. He said there were ways to resolve this that did not require the kind of disruption Ebi was proposing. Ways that protected everyone. Ebi listened to the whole thing. Then he said, "Tell them I am not proposing disruption. I am describing what happens if my son's situation does not change within 2 weeks." The man left. 3 nights later, something moved in the compound after midnight. Not a person. Nothing that announced itself clearly enough to confront. Just the quality of attention the Amagbeke night sometimes carried, sitting directly outside their door. Heavy, patient, reminding them it knew exactly where they were. Preye did not sleep. Ebi sat in the dark and waited for it to do something. It did not. It simply stayed until before dawn, and then was gone. He understood what it was. A demonstration. A reminder that they had reach and were willing to use it. He went back to them the next morning. He told them he knew what had come to his compound the night before. He told them he had expected it. He told them it had not changed anything. Then he said, "I have written everything down. Every name, every operation, every family, every meeting I attended for 25 years. The writing is not in this village. If anything happens to me, to my wife, to any of my children, it goes out to everyone. Before you have time to do anything about it. I am not negotiating. I am informing." The silence that followed was the silence of people who had held power through secrecy for decades, suddenly understanding that the secrecy was no longer guaranteed. Within the week, things began to change for Tare. It started with one phone call. A client Tare had written off months earlier called back. Circumstances had changed. He'd like to revisit. Tare went expecting nothing. He came out with a signed contract and a deposit. The following week, a supplier who had gone silent reached out. He was sorry for the disruption. He'd like to continue. Then, a deal stalled for 6 months on a technicality no one could explain was suddenly unstuck, with an apology from the other end and no explanation for the delay. Tare sat in the office at the end of the 3rd week and looked at his numbers. They were moving. He folded the feeling down, stayed practical, kept executing. He delivered what he said he would, when he said he would. The numbers kept moving. Doubled by the 3rd month, tripled by the 6th. New contracts arrived without being chased. The operation that had been on the edge of folding became, within a year, the strongest it had ever been. New branches opened. New partnerships formed. The wealth, once it found its direction, moved with the momentum of water that has found its channel, gathering speed, gaining mass, impossible to stop. He did not celebrate. He worked harder. 7 months after business opened, Tare drove back into Amagbeke. No announcement. He simply came. The convoy moved along the road from the waterside like something from a different version of reality. The village stopped. People came out of compounds. Children ran alongside. Market women set down their goods. Tare stepped out in front of his parents' compound and stood there for a moment, taking in the same small house, the weathered zinc roof, the mango tree taller now, the wall that had needed repainting for as long as he could remember. He stood there because he needed to feel the full weight of what this compound represented, what his parents had carried inside it, what had been protected here, and what it had cost. Then he went inside. The mansion went up behind the old house, built for comfort, not display. Built to say, you will never be uncomfortable again. Ebi asked for the old house to remain standing. It stays, Tare said, without hesitation. Then came the schools, the borehole that brought clean water to a community that had carried it from the creek for generations. The road repaired properly. Businesses set up for Timi, for Ebiere, for Somo, each one built around what they were already reaching for. Amagbeke began to look like a place someone believed in, and the Coven watched all of this. They watched a family that had refused to feed them for 25 years produce the most successful man the village had ever seen. They watched him pour that success back into the village, the same village they had spent decades keeping desperate so it would remain dependent. The arrangement was breaking down. Members who had given everything, placed names on that altar, offered blood in service of the collective, were watching a couple who had given nothing outperform all of them. The logic that had held the Coven together for generations was collapsing in real time. They sent a message to Ebi and Preye, simple and direct. Your son is the most successful man from this village. Everything he has was opened by us. The account must be settled. Bring what you owe, or we will take back everything we gave, and more. Preye received the message and sat with it for 2 days. Then she told Ebi. He listened without expression. Are you afraid? He said. Yes, she said. What do you want to do? I want to be finished with it, she said. Properly finished. I want to take away whatever power this has by bringing it into the open. I want our children to know everything, and I want this village to know everything. Then, all right. On a Sunday evening, they walked to the center of Amagbeke, and Ebi spoke. Not as a rumor, as testimony. He said everything, and then he said names. The silence that followed had weight. In Amagbeke, the silence broke. In other places, it is still keeping its accounts.